My name is Jeff Morgan. I'm from Dallas, Texas. This upcoming Sunday, September the 13th, is Grandparents' Day. And it's a day that we should actually take and really think about the role of our grandparents. It's a day that, of all places, the church should be celebrating grandparents. And yet, too often, the church will talk about parents, they'll talk about mothers, they'll talk about fathers, they talk about the nuclear family, but they don't talk about the important role of grandparents. And that's unfortunate. Very unfortunate, because that is a very short-sighted North American viewpoint. A biblical viewpoint includes not just the mother and the father and the children, but also the grandparents and very strong extended family. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 9 says this: "Watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things that your eyes have seen. Teach them to your children and to their children after them." Again, Deuteronomy 4 verse 9. That is the biblical mandate for grandparenting. It is a biblical mandate for grandparents teaching grandchildren. It is the biblical mandate for parents to allow grandparents into the grandchildren's lives. This idea that somehow all we need is the parents, and the parents are the only ones that should have any control over the children, that is a faulty Christian position. It is a defective North American position. It is not really a true biblical position. Many grandparents today are missing out on some of the very important opportunities that they have to pass on their faith to their grandchildren. And when we talk about grandparents, I'd like to talk about 4 types of grandparents first. The first one is the blocked grandparent. And the blocked grandparent is the grandparent that maybe can't see the grandchildren. Sometimes it is a grandparent who is very separated by distance from the grandchildren. Sometimes there is a daughter or a son who withholds the grandchildren from the grandparent, and they think that somehow that is serving the children, that's protecting the children. There may be a few minority cases where that is the case, but in many instances it is just plain selfishness. It is something that we in our North American culture have engendered, and that we've almost taught as being a biblical responsibility. Again, the biblical mandate goes back to Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 9, that you are to teach your children and to your children's children. This idea that only parents teach a child is just not biblical. Very interesting, at the end of Jacob's life, when he was blessing Joseph's children, he put one hand on one son, one hand on the other son, and Joseph said to him, no, Father, you've got it the wrong way. This is the older, this is the younger. And Jacob was able to say, no, this is the way it's supposed to be. God will bless them both, but the grandfather actually had more spiritual insight, more direction from God as to who was supposed to be blessed more or have priority in the plan of God. So if you have a grandparent in your community that is blocked from seeing the grandchild, as a church, it is your duty, your responsibility to gather around that grandparent. I've talked with many grandparents that have said that in our church we have a number of grandparents that cannot see their grandchildren. And unfortunately today, too often, the church sides with the parents or the children of the grandparents. They don't even look at the story. It's almost as if the church today has now said the prodigal son, we must side with the prodigal. We will not side with the gracious father or the grandparents. And I have experienced this personally. When a situation with my grandchildren, with Children's Protective Services got involved, I got thrown under the bus. I was the one who kept my grandchildren from actually being taken from my daughter, and somehow I got blamed for this whole incident. I've gone to many churches, and the churches basically have looked at me as somehow being violent and perpetrating some type of evil. My ex-wife got up there on a stand, committed perjury against me because she did not want me to have that relationship with my grandchildren, even though she herself wanted the grandchildren put up for adoption and taken out of their lives. I fall in the category of a blocked grandparent. I was a grandparent who was very strong with my grandchildren, babysat them often 4 times a week, sometimes 5, sometimes 2, but I was with them all the time. My youngest grandchild took his first steps walking to me. My older grandchild was the one who, no matter whose arms he was in, he would come running to me. He basically lived at our house in many instances, and when he wasn't living here, I was staying over at his house or his apartment to watch them there. But right now I am a blocked grandparent because of this whole thing with Children's Protective Services. I have not seen my grandchildren now for over 5 years, and everybody seems to be okay with this. And this is an area of real failure for the church. There is a church called Shoreline City Church is down in Garland. I've spoken with the pastor there. I've spoken with all sorts of people. And they have decided, even though they know the story, they have decided unilaterally to side with my daughter and believe things that they know are not true. So I have not seen my grandchildren for over 5 years. Now my daughter has moved out of the area. I don't know when I will see them again. I will tell you, as a grandparent, it was so difficult to go through this stuff. There was one time when I was shopping at Sam's and I thought I lost my Sam's card, and I thought, oh no, I've got a picture, because the picture was with me and my grandson, and I just thought, I can't lose that. That's my grandson, and fortunately I found it. But we were, like I said, very, very close. We spent so much time together. It's amazing. And yet the church has miserably failed. My ex-wife has intentionally done things, and her new husband, by the way, who is a former pastor, a pastor who was, I believe, either fired from his ministry or else resigned. But they have also been involved in trying to keep me away from my grandchildren. My ex-wife's parents, who are missionaries, they have perpetrated all sorts of things as well. It's really a shame. When my grandchildren were here, every night when I'd go to sleep with them, I'd sing hymns to them. I'd be reading the Bible with them. I'd be praying for them. We'd always be praying for Mommy, that Mommy would get good tips that night, because Mommy had to provide for them. And, you know, they were always wiggling around, but they were with me. And I bought them their first Bible. I bought my one grandson his first Bible. I don't know about the other one. I have other stuff here. And I look so much forward to actually being this outstanding grandfather for them. And yet I am one of these people that would be a blocked grandparent. The churches, there are block grandparents in your congregation, and you are failing them if you are not helping to reconcile that relationship. You cannot just say, well, you know, it's too difficult for us to figure this out. Wrong. There is a biblical priority, and you need to say that the biblical mandate is that grandparents should be there to teach their grandchildren. But I've had pastors that have told me, don't worry about your grandchildren. They're in good hands. They're with us. This is perverse for any type of a minister or somebody like that to say that. So we have the block grandparent, but then you have a second type of grandparent, which would be the unequipped grandparent. And the unequipped grandparent, basically, he or she is just not aware of all the tools that are out there today that can be used to help bring a child to faith in Jesus Christ, or to help solidify them in their faith. What I do know is that with my wife, it was her parents that helped to keep many of their grandchildren on track. To this day, even though all the grandchildren are older, they still go to granddad at times for counseling. That's the type of relationship that they have. But many grandparents don't know about what to do to intentionally disciple somebody. So they're unequipped. And the church has actually been developing a lot of materials for that. So for the unequipped grandparent, the church should be looking for these materials. We have over 30 million grandparents in our country, and they could reach so many children, be discipling them for Christ, be leading them to faith, and yet our church is failing them. Our church is not equipping them. It's almost like somehow once you hit 65 or 70, you may be able to do a few things, but you no longer have purpose. In our generation, we have more wealth as grandparents, we have longer lifespans, we should be being equipped to be providing, to be pouring into our grandchildren's lives. And if you are a church and if you have a block grandparent, you should be making reconciliation. And if you have unequipped grandparents, you should be providing awareness of tools that they can use to help disciple their grandchildren. Then you have the cultural grandparent. And the cultural grandparent, he or she, we just love our grandchildren. We play with our grandchildren. We take them to this, we take them to that. But there's really no element of discipleship involved. We're just going to enjoy culture with them. We're going to be there for all of their plays. We're going to be there for their basketball games. We're going to be there for their recitals and everything else. All of that stuff is wonderful. But a grandparent should be able to do more than that. Because again, going back to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, a grandparent is to teach his children and his children's children. That is the biblical mandate. Anybody who's not doing that is not living up to what they should be doing. And once again, if churches are blocking this, churches are failing in their mission as churches. You should be sharing your testimony not only with your children, but also with your grandchildren. So we have the block grandparent, we have the unequipped grandparent, we have the cultural grandparent, but then we also have number 4. This would be the biblical grandparent. And the biblical grandparent is a grandparent who understands that his life is not over just because the children are out of the house. He has a new ministry. The ministry is not just to be there for the children and for the people around him, but for the grandchildren. Grandparents have a very important role to play in their grandchildren's lives. And the grandparents who understand this biblical perspective will devote time, will devote money, will be very intentional about how to teach our grandchildren to embrace their faith in Jesus Christ. There are some people right now who talk a lot about parental rights, almost as if grandparents are accursed or somehow that they should be like held under control. From a biblical viewpoint, that is very incorrect. It's short-sighted. It's very cultural. Once again, the biblical viewpoint is that a grandparent should teach children and their children's children. And so the organizations, there are some organizations that are great. They talk about parental rights. Some of the churches talk about we love parental rights. But if you are not talking about empowering grandparents to disciple their grandchildren as a church, you are failing. And if you are not helping block grandparents to reunite and to have that input into their grandchildren's lives, for whatever reason, you are failing. And I would go so far as well, because in the state of Texas, we have had various laws that basically prohibit grandparents from taking active roles in their grandchildren's lives. And we have organizations that claim to be very good organizations, one of them being the Texas Homeschool Coalition. They take a very anti-grandparent stand. And I understand that there are some grandparents that you must take that stand with, but the vast majority, by far, just like the vast majority of parents, are good grandparents and want to be involved. So for an organization like the Texas Homeschool Coalition, they are not really biblical in the sense, because the biblical perspective is that grandparents should be teaching not just their children, but their children's children, according to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. Thank you.